all currency media measurements in France, and we also conduct audits abroad and certification programs on retail media and drive to store. And when you see our 4 core values, you won't be surprised to hear that we are strong supporters of the European Media Freedom Act. And this is why, with Olivier Dauphren and the team, we decided to organize this webinar dedicated to EMFA. So this morning, you are going to hear from 3 key speakers. In running order, Sébastien LÉCOU, Deputy Director, the Research Department of ARCOM, the French regulator. Then Conor, Director of Regulatory and Public Affairs from EGTA. And then Yannick CARRIOU, CEO of Médiamétrie and President of AMC, the Audience Measurement Coalition. After that, we will have a Q&A session. So if you want to ask questions, you will have the opportunity to do so at the end of the webinar, but you can also type them in the chat during the presentation. So the first big thank you to our 3 speakers. And now I'm going to hand over to Sébastien.
Thank you very much, Valérie, and thank you to the CESP for giving me this opportunity to talk about the European Media Freedom Act. So I'm Sébastien LÉCOU. As you said, I'm the Deputy Head of the Research and Economics Department at ARCOM. We are the regulator of the audiovisual sector, and more because of national or European legislation, we are also a regulator of online content. And in France, we will be the authority that will have to apply most of EMFA provisions. So I know that we are here today to talk about the impact of EMFA on audience measurement, but we saw that it would be useful to take a little step back and get a look at what is EMFA and why this new European legislation was necessary. So if you look at the text of EMFA, the text stresses the importance of media freedom, hence the name of the legislation, and pluralism as 2 of the main pillars of democracy. And the text identifies a certain number of market failures that we see today in the European media sector. The first one is, more and more there is intermediation of media by platforms. And we know that platforms lead to some issues like polarizing content and multiplication of disinformation content. We also, of course, have a diversion of advertising revenues that go from traditional media to platforms. And of course, this goes with a risk on media pluralism if media cannot sustain themselves anymore. The text also acknowledges the lack of harmonization in national rules and stresses the importance of interferences that we see today by foreign countries, which lead to high risk of misinformation in the media sector. So if we go on the next slide, in face of these risks, EMFA introduces a series of new provisions. I'm not going to be exhaustive, but in order to give you an idea of what is in EMFA, EMFA introduces protection of editorial independence and protection of journalists, a transparency and an obligation of transparency of media ownership. EMFA also create the European Board for Media Services, which will be the union of all the national regulators. It introduces a new control of the impact of media mergers on pluralism. And this is a new control that will be parallel to the competition control that some of you may know. And we also have, once again, it's not exhaustive, but we have an obligation of transparency and non-discrimination on member states concerning the allocation of their advertising. One of the reasons of this new provision is to avoid unfair influence of some media by government. So you see that we are really dealing with democratic issues that are related to media freedom, not necessarily economic issues, but it is interesting that, and yes, and this to see that in this text, this EMFA that is really legislation about democracy, that the legislator has recognized the importance and the central character of audience measurement. As you know, audience measurement, of course, has a direct impact on the allocation of advertising and so on the revenue of media, and so, of course, on media pluralism. So concerning audience measurement, the European legislator has identified a market failure, that is the fact that online platforms today do not abide to industry standards, and they provide proprietary measurements, and that is, well, they measure themselves and in a way that is not transparent. We know that a solution that was proposed by some stakeholders was to mandate audience platform to be measured by a third party. Oh, well,
right. Someone took control, but I'm coming back to your slides. I don't know what happened. No problem.
Yes, slide 4. Perfect. Thank you. So we know that some stakeholders consider that a solution to this problem was to mandate audience platforms to be measured by a third party. But it is important to note that this is not the direction that was taken by EMFA, which clearly states that services and platforms are free to develop their own measurement system because it's part of their freedom to conduct business. So in other words, EMFA does not impose platforms to be measured by third parties. So what is EMFA asking concerning audience measurement? First, EMFA considers that providers of audience measurement system shall comply with the principle of transparency, impartiality, inclusiveness, proportionality, non-discrimination, comparability, and verifiability. And you see that we are very close to the principles that Valérie exposed earlier concerning the functioning of CESP. And secondly, the text considered that proprietary audience measurement systems, that is the audience measurement that are provided by a platform, for example, that is measuring its own audience, shall be audited once a year. And also platforms and audience measurement system will have to provide to media services providers information concerning their audience. So it raises quite a lot of questions on what we should consider to be transparency, what is impartiality, what is verifiability, what will be the nature of the audit that will have to take place. And I know that this will
Alexandru, că poți să faci ce vrei.
Can you be on mute, Lucia, please? Can you mute? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I know that this will not be completely satisfying, but at ARCOM we will not be able to answer all these questions because the text of EMFA states that it's actually the European Commission that will be able to issue guidelines on these issues in order to define how to interpret the text. So it will not be the role of national regulators like ARCOM to decide on these matters. We do not have a timeline on these guidelines yet, but as you have seen, there are a lot of issues in EMFA, some of them on quite important issues like foreign influence or media merger control, and it's possible that the Commission will have to prioritize some of these issues. But I will be able to tell you a little bit more about the last disposition of EMFA. That is that national regulators will have to encourage providers of audience measurement system to draw up with media service providers and interested parties codes of conduct. And national regulators will have to encourage providers of audience measurement to comply with existing codes. So on this issue, I can give you an idea on how it will take place. So maybe as you have understood, EMFA insists on the importance of European integration. So at ARCOM, we will not decide on our own how to deal with this code of conduct in France. We will be working with our colleagues in the newly created media board. And actually, our Italian colleagues today have the lead on this issue. So what they are doing and what they have done, they have collected opinion of each national regulator on how each member state deal with these issues today. Each member state, each regulator has provided a description of audience measurement in each country. There was an analysis of existing bodies setting common standards. So we had the opportunity to explain how CESP works in France, and I think that will be a very interesting example for our colleagues. And a workshop will be organized by our Italian colleagues very soon to help to reach a common approach to this issue. Finally, we can also note that an interesting aspect of the text is that it allows member states to go further than EMFA in their national legislation, which is not always the case for European legislation. And as some of you may know, there is, for example, a law proposal in France that would mandate all audience to be measured by third parties. But this legislation has not been adapted yet. Last word, I've spoken about the law, about EMFA. I tried to be as precise as I could, but to clarify things, I'm not a lawyer. So on a day-to-day basis in our department at ARCOM, we are conducting studies on media consumption or economic studies. And we are a big consumer of audience data. And when, for example, the regulator wants to protect children online, we have to know exactly what children are doing online. So we cannot have a good regulation if we do not have good audience data. And also some of the articles of EMFA that seem to have no relation with audience measurement will actually rely a lot on good audience measurement. For example, member states will have to assess the impact of media measures on pluralism. And in order to do that, you have to know exactly how people inform themselves. And thanks to traditional audience measurements, and in France, of course, we rely on Médiamétrie, we have a very good understanding today of news consumption on television, radio, and even on the internet. But it's still very difficult today to know how people inform themselves on social media platforms, for example. And this is a problem because we know that this is where young people today find their news. So audience measurement is of course important for advertising, and advertising is important for media pluralism. But for us, for the regulator, audience measurement is really a more global issue. And this objective to have better audience measurement of platform is really central for us. And so on the last slide, I have given my email.
It's not.
Oh, sorry, but feel free to reach to ARCOM if you have any opinion on the implementation of EMFA, and we are very eager to hear from each one of you, and of course I think we'll learn a lot from our two next speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sébastien. So if you have any question for Sébastien, you can ask them at the end or in the chat. So thanks, that gave us a very clear picture of what EMFA is and the implication for audience measurement. So now I'm going to turn to Conor. Good morning, Conor.
Hello.
Hello. And so you work for EGTA. You are the Director of Regulatory and Public Affairs. And maybe as a start, you can explain to us what EGTA is for those who don't know EGTA's role.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Valérie, and thank you for the invitation to talk to you about EMFA this morning. So many of you may know EGTA, but just again to explain. So we're the international trade body of multi-platform TV and audio businesses. We have more than 180 members in over 40 markets. You may know us as our former title, the Association of Television and Radio Sales Houses. We are the organization that represents the sales houses, so the broadcasters who are monetizing the content, and we're involved in everything to do with connecting clients, agencies, advertisers, and broadcasters, media service providers together, trying to benchmark, knowledge share, also, of course, lobbying and advocacy for a better market and a better understanding of TV and radio advertising, and of course the evolution of that. So it's very much video and audio advertising that we speak of these days, and that's why we're based in Brussels for very obvious reasons. So I think that's just enough to give you an idea of what we do and who we represent as a intro. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you. That's very clear. So Sébastien presented EMFA. What is the sales house perspective on EMFA today?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I was trying to think of how do you answer that in a straightforward manner. Maybe the first thing that comes to mind would be cautious optimism, let's say, and the reason I would say that is it's not like our members saw the discussions, saw the announcement, and it's nothing happens in Brussels without everybody hearing about it in advance. That the European Media Freedom Act was going to look at audience measurement. It wasn't that we are actively calling for audience measurement to be brought directly in to a piece of legislation that would be looking at media service providers, at our members directly. Audience measurement, as you all know, is very complicated, and each market is trying to address the challenges from a cross-media measurement approach themselves, but also together, and to share best practices. So we were very much supporters of a parallel business and legislative approach, let's say. Once we knew that this was happening, what we wanted was to ensure that there would be a principles-based approach to audience measurement in the European Media Freedom Act, and that it would be future-proof, to ensure that it was meaningful, comprehensive, and beneficial for the industry. The very first factor that was kind of a red line for us would be to, and this was spelt out, and this was clearly the reason from the European Commission's perspective and the other EU institutions why there was a need to address audience measurement, was, as Sébastien mapped out, that online platforms are competing for advertising revenues with media service providers. But it needed to be very clearly spelt out in both the definitions and Article 24 that online platforms are, for want of a better word, and don't want to be too reductive, the target of this intervention, that they need to raise their standards, and there needs to be a sort of a common bar for what basic principles of audience measurement are. So that was the main objective. Now, I think that by and large has been achieved. If you look at the definitions, if you look at Article 24, those objectives have been addressed. The principles, as Sébastien laid out, the 7 main principles, I won't repeat them because I fear we might be repeating them a lot in the next 45 minutes. We all know what they are, let's say. They're sound. They make a lot of sense. We support them. What we need in order for that meaningfulness is that regulators, media service providers, advertisers, agency, online platforms, everybody who is affected by the audience measurement in scope understands what those principles mean. We kind of require, again, for want of a better word, some sort of a blueprint, a checklist as to how these principles will be implemented in practice. That's I think crucial to the rollout of EMFA and Article 24. Those principles are the foundation, but we need to kind of have a very clear understanding of how that will affect the current market. And then there needs to be, I think, I was finding it very interesting what Sébastien was mentioning, how audience measurement will impact many different articles in EMFA, and it's clear. It also will, you know, we can't look really at audience measurement and EMFA in isolation. There's the relationship between the Digital Markets Act, where there is a article on audience measurement, or it touches on performance measurement, I think is the terminology used. We have e-privacy, and I'm sure Yannick will say something about that. So we need to make sure that all these, I keep coming up, meaningful, comprehensive, and beneficial, that it needs to make sense. So that's where the cautious optimism comes. And that's also driven by, because we're dealing with legislation, we're dealing with policymakers, we're, you know, I'm a lobbyist, so there's a bit of healthy skepticism there as well. We need to kind of ensure that this is done correctly. But I remain positive. I think it's been a constructive process. We also kind of need to look at this from, what does it deliver? So there's the foundation is, it's all about methodology, that this is what has to be shared by the online platforms. They have to kind of justify and explain where these figures came from, so that the rest of the market understands them. There's then also the data sharing aspect for media service providers, content on online platforms. So we really need that sort of checklist to understand how it will roll out. So yeah, that's my initial answer. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Conor. And so what do you see as next steps for the implementation of EMFA?
Yeah, so again, Sébastien mentioned that his Italian colleagues in the European board, the Italian regulator, and again, Sébastien, forgive me if I get this wrong or if I speak out of place, but my understanding is they're leading the work stream on audience measurement for the board. They will be the ones who will be reaching out to stakeholders, and I believe that you know, there will be a meeting very soon to discuss the next steps from the board perspective. But you're quite right. What you mentioned is kind of the crux of the issue when it comes to what happens next. There's a difference. There's two guidelines that the guidelines I mentioned in two articles, in Article 18 and Article 24 in the Media Freedom Act. In Article 18, there shall be guidelines, which means that that's the key priority for the European Commission. My understanding is that the Commission can only they have to produce guidelines on Article 18 in EMFA, and only once those guidelines really have been finalised can they move on to the next guidelines, which they may produce, which would be Article 24 guidelines on audience measurement. So it's not obligatory. Our feeling, together with the other broadcasting associations, we produced a joint paper with the Association of Commercial Television and Video on Demand in Europe and the European Broadcasting Union, so the commercial and public broadcasters. And we shared that with regulators and with the policymakers. We need guidelines. We need those guidelines to ensure that the Article 24 is implemented correctly. But we're aware of the steps that need to take place. So that I've just mentioned and Sébastien mentioned already. So we need to start with that dialogue with the regulators to reach out, to speak with colleagues of Yannick's from Médiamétrie, but also from the Audience Measurement Coalition, who we already, you know, share a very constructive relationship with, and we're very much on board with what the AMC stand for and what they're looking for. So we need to move forward there in order for there to be effective implementation. And we also kind of sort of use the audience measurement provisions as a sort of foundation, as a bedrock, to allow evolutions in each market for the benefit of each market and the industry itself, but kind of using the audience measurement provisions in EMFA as a let's say a lighthouse, guiding principles, right? So in a perfect world, this will all roll out let's not say seamlessly, but in the correct direction, and we'll be in a very good place. But a few of these conversations need to not just happen, they need to happen meaningfully, they need to have a clear goal, they need to have an end result. And I think without those guidelines, it won't be correct, and it won't be really very easy to implement Article 24. Personally speaking, I think our members believe so, that we need some guidelines. So that's next, but we need to have, we know it will take time.
And what's your bet on the timeline of these guidelines?
I have immense respect for the challenges that the policymakers face, and I know that this is not an easy task that they have. My understanding is that there will be meetings before, like very soon, with the regulators, with the board, to talk about with stakeholder. Of course, the Commission will be present, I'm sure, for those meetings, to share best practices and what we think the next steps will be. I'm not involved, and EGTA is not involved in Article 18. We know that other colleagues are. Progress is being made, but slow, let's say. So hopefully we get some guidelines, let's say, on audience measurement in Article 24 in the first half of next year. Is that achievable? Maybe Sébastien would be able to. I'm very much clear that this is not a board responsibility. We are aware of that. It's a Commission one. But maybe I'm being optimistic there, but as I mentioned at the beginning, cautiously so.
Okay, thank you very much, Conor. So now let's turn to Yannick. So Yannick, you're CEO of Médiamétrie, but also president of AMC, the Audience Measurement Coalition. So maybe you can start by explaining the role of AMC.
Yes, very briefly, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I think we are basically pursuing the same goals as Conor and Sébastien just outlined. So the Audience Measurement Coalition is now an association of 20 plus members, JICs, MOCs, and research providers. And basically we advocate for transparent and fair audience measurements to the European policymakers, which, as Conor just said, translate into the need of understanding how general principles will actually translate into, let's say, practical applications. So this is a very technical matter. We are very often showered by requests on audience numbers for general interest policies of all sorts, and also for the more, let's say, media-related topics. So we also know that this is a very difficult topic to grasp sometimes from the policymakers. So we are here to provide the expertise of the men on the front, men on the ground, to provide the right level of expertise and technical detail. Sometimes not too much. We also have to refrain from, let's say, making them drown under the technical details. So it's kind of balance we try to make sure that it becomes concrete at the end.
Mm-hmm. Very clear. So how does AMC work with the local regulators like ARCOM on the one hand and with the European Commission on the other hand, because we understood they have a very important role?
Yeah, so we are of course doing a bit of both, and this is true across the EU with all the members. I think besides the duty and the mission to deliver the right and the proper level of technical details, we have to help the Board of Media Services to resolve a kind of tension. Because of course, each time you talk about EU level regulation, there is, and Sébastien mentioned it, there is a sense of harmonization and consistency across the region. And if you talk about audience measurement, the history of audience measurement is really domestic in nature. So we try to, between the members, we try to work on the real topics. So we mentioned the principles. I won't repeat the principles myself, but they are just words. And as Conor said, we need to give more granularity and more reality to these words. What does it mean in concrete terms? let's say, the first impression or the spontaneous answer to this question by different audience measurement providers across Europe may be different. We're talking from a different standpoints, different level of resources, different histories, and different governance models. So what we try to do is to avoid that because the code of conduct has to be initially built by the audience measurement providers themselves under the stewardship of the national regulators. We try to avoid that it goes in all possible directions. So that's the let's say the need for harmonization will be quite difficult to reach at some point. So we try to harmonize as much as we can without overpassing, let's say the duties of AMC, because AMC is not here to rule the audience measurement at local level, and there are discussions that probably need some, let's say, flexibility around the way things are actually undertaken at local level. But nevertheless, we try to show a common understanding and a common speech to the national and to the national regulator and to the BMS. This is not easy, to be honest, because some of the questions that have been raised by the EMFA we never asked us before. So it's also a good exercise internally to try to build this common picture, and that's where the need of a coalition and an association is actually needed.
Okay, yes, very clear. Verifiability is the seventh principle of EMFA. Sébastien reminded us that the system must be auditable and allow independent verification to ensure its correctness and reliability. From your point of view, what does it imply in terms of audit requirements?
Well, as Conor said, we released the paper on the 7 principles. By far, the seventh on verifiability is the one that has been the most discussed and the one that is probably the most summarized in our paper, because we think we need further work on this. For us, it's a cornerstone of the legislation, because if there is no audit, no verification of anything, you can say whatever you want. At some point, if things are not verified, certified, audited, the way you want to name it, things are not solidly anchored to the basic principles and the basic targets of the EMFA. So it's really critical, but it happened also to be one of the most difficult topics to address for several reasons. Maybe the most important one is that verifiability and audit is a polysemic word. We can understand many different things under this with this name. So we try progressively to build a position where we may actually, I say we may because the discussion is not over within the EMC, just to be clear. So this is a topic that needs further discussion between members. So, but we may distinguish different layers of audits and topics. First, there is something related to the data, because more and more, let's say, the move to cross-media measurements, the fragmentation of media consumption, more and more requires the use of large data sets coming from the publishers, from platforms, from sometimes internet service providers, to be ingested in the measurement to make it reliable and more precise. These data, as an object, needs to be verified and certified. So this is the first layer of verification. Then you have something which is more classical in nature, which is the compliance control, or let's say the classical quality audit processes. So where when a provider, and in that respect, Médiamétrie is one of these providers. So we build the measurement. So we need someone to certify and to audit the work we are performing, just to say, okay, it's okay compared to the objectives and to the goal. It is done the way it is supposed to be done. So that's pretty much something we do. So we are audited by you, the CESP. In some other places, the GICS plays a bit that role because they actually subcontract the work to research vendors, so Nielsen, Kantar, GfK, Ipsos, and their role is basically about this kind of quality control. So there is another layer of audit which is going to become more and more important, and which would be more scientific in nature. It's not quality control, it's really about science. Why that? Because it's a bit linked also to the data surge in our industry. More and more of the measurement will be actually based on modeling. So a model is by definition imperfect. And there are always discussion of the state-of-the-art modeling, etc. So it's not a black and white 1-0 type of answer, but we need someone just to make sure that to convey the message that any modeling which is actually applied is, let's say, reasonable in terms of quality, in terms of resources allocated to these models, etc. Especially because I think everybody can more or less understand that, let's say, a panel is representative. You have the right proportion of women and men, old and younger people, etc. But when it comes down to modeling, this is really an expert matter. So most of the users won't understand that. So we need a kind of external authority to, let's say, to justify that this is okay in the broad sense. That's another layer of certification or verification. So when you combine this, so we are a bit in the, let's say, in the mix of all these very notions, and we try to clarify what could be done as a minimum base for each of these layers to serve the purpose of the EMFA for a great verification principle in terms of the way it is applied. Okay,
very, very clear. Thank you. Conor mentioned that there are other European texts that impact audience measurement. You mentioned e-privacy. There's the DMA, which requests that platforms share their data with advertisers and publishers. GDPR, of course, also impacts audience measurement. How do these two European texts work in combination with EMFA from your point of view?
Yes, maybe not explicitly at this stage, but there will, I think, even if the DMA addresses something slightly different, but the principles of the DMA application will certainly transfer to the EMFA, and there are other texts in line of sight that could also interfere. Just to illustrate let's say the complexity of different legal texts being interlocked in a way. If you start from the EMFA, so the EMFA from the DMA. In the DMA, there are provisions that would force the gatekeepers in that case, so the big, large platforms listed by the EU, to share data with advertisers or their mandated intermediaries. So sharing data at disaggregated level, because sharing data as aggregated at an aggregated level usually doesn't create massive issues. You can then question how this is aggregated, and we are back to the verifiability question. But at the same time, when you say you have to share disaggregated level data, then you raise the barriers or the difficulties with the GDPR and with all the related text. GDPR, in the context of audience measurement, is not consistently applied across Europe to start with. So it means that if you start from France or from Germany, you don't start from an equal footing. So to start with, so there is first a kind of consistency problem to solve. Then, to be honest, people are not really easily sharing individual or disaggregated data. This is real business assets to their mind, and this is probably true. And then they raise all the possible protection, including their own legal protection against any claim of a GDPR on GDPR infringement. So that anyway, we cannot, because of GDPR, in the DMA, there is also an article 13.4 and 5 anti-circumvention that says that even if GDPR is at stake, the platform should make all the possible efforts for the audience, for the data to be transferable, which is so all possible efforts. We don't know what exactly it means, but that has to be clarified. You see that there is a kind of interlocked or intertwined set of legal issues. They have to share data. They have to comply with GDPR. GDPR is unevenly applied across the different countries, and depending on the reading and the understanding you have on the GDPR, it raises more or less hurdles for the data sharing, data transfer. So we are also going to Brussels this afternoon to discuss that. I think we need to find a way to make GDPR more compatible with the application of the data sharing for DMA. And this will certainly also be reflected in the way data can be shared under the EMFA provisions. So that's a kind of discussion. It's not uncommon at the EU level because texts have been negotiated in silos and at different times. Then you end up just realizing that there are some possible conflicts or some needed adjustment, let's put it this way in a positive manner, between the different texts. So this is something we are working also as AMC.
Okay, good. A lot of work ahead. Well, so thank you very much to the three speakers. Now the floor is yours. So it's the Q&A session. So if someone from the audience has a question for one of our three speakers or a comment, now it's the time to ask your question. While a question comes, maybe Yannick, the same question as to Conor. What's your bet on the guideline production in terms of the timeline?
I think Conor's bet was a bold one. Conor's prognostics was a bold one. So honestly, so the EBMS is only starting the work right now with a workshop at the end of this month, which I think we'll just let's say set the scene for the discussion and list probably the different topics to be discussed further. The work with the work on the local code of conduct is just starting as well. And if I remember well, I'm not totally sure what I'm saying here, but there is a kind of connection between the guidelines and the code of conduct. The guidelines should be also based on the cumulative number of code of conducts, so to say. So I think having something, I think, Conor, you said some first half next year, something like that. So that's for me, that's quite optimistic. But we have the right to be optimistic, you know. That's even a quality.
At the outset, we may as well be, Yannick, right?
The short answer is I have no idea, to be honest. We try to make things happen, but it's not really in our hands.
Okay, thanks. Any question or comments from the floor? No, it was all very, very clear. Well, in that case, I really thank you all for your participation. Again, a big thank you to speakers for their time and their presentation. That really helped us better understand what the next steps are. And we look forward to these next steps. So thank you very much to all of you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Merci.